Your nonprofit board can make or break your organization. Now, a lot of people are confused as to the role of a nonprofit board and the responsibility that they're supposed to have, but we're going to break all of that down with you now. So, I am Sharmon Lebby. I'm a nonprofit consultant and I work with social and environmental justice organizations, helping them to build solid foundations so that they can thrive for the long term and have the impact that they want to have. Now, your nonprofit board is generally supposed to be the governance for the organization, right? They are looking at that overhead, overall strategy. They're not necessarily doing the day to day work. Now, if you have a smaller organization, chances are your board is more in the day to day and they're going to be doing some work. But regardless of whether or not they are there in the trenches every single day, they should have some roles and some responsibilities in order to help this organization survive. So, a lot of people also tend to think that the role of their board is simply fundraising, and that is also not the case. While it's important for the board to be involved in fundraising, that is not their sole responsibility. Most people hear that boards have a fiduciary duty to the nonprofit organization, but that doesn't mean solely money, right? It means that this organization is being put into their care, into their trust. They are being expected to take care of it and nurture it and make sure it goes and does what it needs to do. Now, even if you have a small working board, your goal should ultimately be to have your board just be a governing board where they're thinking of the long term, when they're looking at strategy, and they leave the day to day stuff to the executive director and any kind of staff and volunteers that you have. The biggest question of all, though, is really like, how do you build this board? How do you make it? How do you make that happen? And the answer really is very intentionally. And we are not always super intentional when we build our boards. I know even when I was starting out, I came on and developed the organization with a group of people who were essentially the board, and then as everyone kind of filtered off and left, I just brought on anybody and everybody. Okay. I just brought on anybody and everybody to make sure that I was fulfilling like the legal obligations for the IRS of having 3 people on the board. And I was not even intentional. I was just like, I am just going to grab anybody and everybody who is willing to do the work and willing to do the job. And it made it really, really difficult because while those people were there for me and they knew, that they were just kind of there to fulfill that role, to take up a space, they didn't really necessarily have any responsibility or passion or like draw to the organization and its mission itself. And so they weren't necessarily invested like they could have been. So as I began to build up my organization more, I got a little more intentional. I thought about the people that I needed, and even then it wasn't quite enough, right? Like I knew I needed a treasurer. I knew I needed a secretary, those specific kind of roles. And so that is who I sought. But over the past years, as I have worked with a bunch of other nonprofit organizations, helping them develop their organizations, helping them to develop their nonprofits, develop their boards, I have realized that so much more intention needs to go into this. So, number one, you need to think about just skill, expertise, lived experience gaps that you may be experiencing on your board. If you work with youth and education, you want to make sure you either, have parents, have some youth representatives, have teachers and different aspects of the people that you have to work with on your board. And I think it's really important, even as we are thinking about like board diversity, that that you don't know everything, right? There are some things that you just don't know that you don't know because you have not had that lived experience. And that is why it is so important to have the people and the communities that you're serving. And I know people are thinking, why would I have a kid on my board, right? And yes, you want someone who is a little more mature and understanding, and it can take time to find that right person, but you need that perspective. You need somebody to understand, even if it is just in an advisory role. You need to make sure that voice is being heard in some form, in some capacity. And I am just extremely, a big advocate of making sure those voices are in decision making roles as well. Now, when we're thinking about things like this and thinking about bringing kids, you need to make sure that you check your state laws and see what they say about it. Most states don't really have specific provisions as long as there is an adult on the board. But also keep in mind that kids, of course, can't sign any kind of legally binding agreement or be held to anything. So some of these things need to be kept in mind, but I would still make sure you have that perspective in some point, in some way, on your board. Whoever you are serving, that voice needs to be there, as far as I'm concerned. If you want to have a very community centered and justice driven organization, those voices need to be on your board and in decision making roles. Now, I have heard people say that, especially if you are serving in any kind of underappreciated, used, or in often cases sometimes marginalized communities, you want to make sure that you are paying them. And while I see that, so they're advocating for them not necessarily to be on the board, but for them to be paid in some kind of advisory role. And while I see how that can be, I think boards don't always take the advice. I know plenty of boards that pay tens of thousands of dollars for strategic plans and strategic advice and then don't even follow through on the plans. So to me, I don't think just having an advisory capacity is always the best. I think they need to be in the rooms where decisions are being made, and those are the voices that need to be heard the most. Now, the other thing, there's several other ways, and a lot of people often want some kind of legal advice on their board or some kind of legal thing. And it's really interesting because I just spoke to a lawyer recently as we were talking about this and how many people want that legal expertise on their board. And she had actually advised, like, unless they were a retired lawyer, they're going to be absolutely no use to you. So you want someone who is not already in the grind working day to day, where they are constantly on the go, where this is something they're going to forget about, where the nonprofit and the responsibilities are a complete afterthought. You're going to want someone who kind of knows the in and outs of your organization, has been with you. And so if that's just kind of contracting a lawyer or retaining them, or there's several free services in different areas, I would definitely more than likely look into those instead of having that legal expertise on the board, unless you can get someone that is retired and is not working in the field quite as much. But outside of that, having other type of expertise is really critical. Having some kind of accounting and financial expertise. Sometimes it's like cybersecurity or like social work experience, educational, different things, policy wise, even just depending on what your organization is doing, what its mission is, what the purpose and your goals are kind of, they're going to dictate who it is that you want to bring on and the expertise and the skills that you need specifically. Now, even thinking about that, then it's like, where do you even find these people? And this is, again, you probably have heard me say it in 50 million different videos now. This is where relationships come into play, and this is where networking comes into play. and whether you need to get into different social media groups and, join your chamber for those networking opportunities, or just, visit people, go to different nonprofit events, like different organizations events. You want to get involved in the community as much as possible, because this is where you're going to find your board members, right? This is the people that you need to know and that you need to hang out with, and in order to ask them about being on your board. And not only that, though, you also want to make sure that these people don't just have the skills and stuff that you need, but they're also values aligned and missions aligned, because all of those things are equally, if not more important than anything else. I think I'm just going to leave it there for now. So best to figure out who it is that you need on your board, and then how to find them. And I think we'll come back for another video to tell you what to do from there. Or and I'm just saying, I have a course on my website on blesseddesigns.com. It is a program specifically built to help you with board development. It is one of the modules actually in the Nonprofit Launch Academy if you are building an organization, and it just walks you step by step through these processes to help you build the board that will work, and to make sure it works, to make sure people are engaged and involved. And granted, people are people, and you can't control people, and sometimes they're good for a season and they're not good at all. And so making sure you have all of that and you're prepared for that in your bylaws to know when it's time for people to go, and how you can very nicely remove them. All that stuff is really, really important. So go to my website, check it out, www.blesseddesignsco.com. I will try and stick a link in the description as well for that board development program.